Let us not forget everything that happens. It's by the will of Allah. Holy will. It's time to unite and stand, and we will be the best amongst men. It's not time to be extreme or a duty unthinkable, but to stand together as one. Tune into Sunnah followers, streaming every day, various platforms. Trust me, you'll find a way. Sunnah followers. It all begins.
Assalamu alaikum. Sunnah Followers, in association with Aris Institute, presents to you an intensive foundation in Islamic studies. We welcome Dr. Ali Shehata, who will be teaching the science of the Quran and the Hadith every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern, streaming right here on Sunnah Followers.
Talked about Sahih al-Bukhari, and this week, inshallah, we're going to talk about Sahih Muslim. And so, in that regards, we'll begin, inshallah. So, last week we talked about this life story of Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, and his collection of the most authentic book of in Islam after the Quran. And so Sahih Muslim is considered to be the second book of Hadith in terms of its authenticity in Islam. And oftentimes we don't, we mention Bukhari and Muslim in the same breath because these are the two authentic books of Hadith, that there is no real disagreement on them. In regard to, I think there's maybe like one or two hadith in the collection of Sahih Muslim. So out of 4,000 hadith, there is a couple of them that there is some discussion between the scholars of hadith regarding them. But as a whole, when we look at Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, we're talking about two books in which there is a great deal of certainty and authenticity. And so the author is Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj al-Qushayri al-Naysaburi, rahimahullah ta'ala. He died in the year 261 after the Hijrah. And among his teachers was Imam Ahmad, Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, and Imam Bukhari himself. So Imam Muslim studied from Imam Bukhari. Now, you might remember from last week that we talked about Ishaq ibn Rahawayh. That Ishaq ibn Rahawayh was we might say he's the teacher of Imam Bukhari who gave the idea for the collection of the Sahih. So it was Ishaq ibn Rahawayh who said, I wish that one of you as the students would make the effort to gather a book of only authentic hadith. And so up until that time, the books of hadith had some mixture of sahih and the authentic and inauthentic hadith in them. And so it was this suggestion from Ishaq ibn Rahawayh rahimahullah ta'ala that led Imam Bukhari to gather his Sahih. So among the students of Imam Muslim rahimahullah was Imam al-Tirmidhi, the great scholar of Hadith, and also the other scholar of Hadith, less well known, Ibn Khuzaymah. And from his students, the one who narrated this book from him the most. So when we look at hadith, we're looking at narrations, right? And so Muslim narrated from the people that came before him back to the Prophet ﷺ. So Muslim narrated to people, right? He narrated from the people that came before, and he narrated to the people that came after. So Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn Sufyan was one of the great students of Imam Muslim, and he is one of the major transmitters of this book. So there's about 3 different people primarily who transmitted hadith from Imam Muslim, and the greatest transmitter was Ibrahim ibn Muhammad ibn Sufyan. There is one narration in a Tirmidhi from Imam Muslim himself, and that is found in the book of fasting, count the Hilal of Sha'ban for Ramadan. So the book took him 15 years to collect, to compile. It has 54 chapters. It has the total number of narrations is I'll fix this. It's about 12,000, and without repetition, it's about 4,000. And the number of mu'allaqat in Sahih Muslim is only 14, while in Bukhari there was considerably more, if you remember when we talked last week. Why is Sahih Muslim considered second after Sahih Bukhari? So we always say that Bukhari is superior. Why is it superior to the collection of Imam Muslim? Anybody know? Any thoughts on why the collection of Bukhari is considered superior to the collection of Muslim, though both of them are considered Sahih? So when we look at the collections of the Sahih in any case, so any collection of the authentic hadith. And so when you look at, so we have Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, we have also Sahih ibn Khuzaymah and Al-Hakim, and so forth. So there are several collections of quote Sahih. Okay. Now, what makes Bukhari superior to all of them is the fact that his criteria that he used. The criteria that he used were the most stringent. The criteria he used to include a hadith in his collection of Sahih was the most stringent. And as a result, there is no discussion, as I said, whatsoever about the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari. There is no discussion. Sahih Muslim had a slightly less stringent requirement, okay? Only in one case. Bukhari, that specific case, in case you would like to know, is that Bukhari, he required for a hadith to be included in his collection that there was a definite meeting between the narrators, that the narrators had met, and there is a definite occasion for that, not just a circumstance. That it was definite, it was recorded that they met, that they encountered each other, they spoke to each other, they traveled, something along those lines. That they were. There's no doubt that they interacted with one another, not just that they lived in the same era. So Muslim, on the other hand, he did not go to that extent, and so he said it is sufficient that if all of the narrators are highly trustworthy, and the narrators themselves, they lived in the same era, okay, then it is enough for me that I will narrate, as long as that they're very trustworthy. So we're talking about extremely honest people, highly trustworthy people, very religious people, people known for their piety. So when they would say, I heard from so and so directly, then we would trust that, okay, because of the fact that they are such you know, such trustworthy people to begin with. But Bukhari said that's not enough. I need to know that they met. I need to have. There has to be some historical event, some aspect that they actually met with one another. Okay, so that's really the only significant difference between the two books in terms of the collection of hadith. In terms of the requirements. Now, when we look at other books like Ibn Khuzaymah and Al-Hakim and so forth, these other books that are quote unquote sahih, their requirements were far less stringent. And as a result of that, that's why they're not really mentioned very often. They're not considered among the essential books for study. So when we look at the books, the essential books for hadith study, how many are there? Who can remember? Anybody? So when we look at them, we generally, the scholars, they say al-kutub as-sitta. Okay, al-kutub as-sitta, the six main books of hadith. And so the scholars of hadith, in general, they're going to say, yes, very good, it is six. So the six main books of hadith, Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and what's the last one? Anybody can tell me? So we have Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and so there's the four books of Sunan and the two books of Sahih. So the last one is An-Nasa'i, okay, An-Nasa'i. So we have the four books of Sunan, so Sunan al-Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and An-Nasa'i. These are the four. And then the two books of Sahih, Bukhari and Muslim. Okay, so these are the Al-Kutub as-Sitta, the six books, okay? And so the one that's commonly studied after that, of course, is the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. But the vast majority of the hadith in Musnad Imam Ahmad will be found in those other books. And so, but that would be the seventh book that we might add, in terms of hadith studies. But due to the fact that its majority of its hadith are distributed in the other ones, that's why it's not. So each one of these books typically has unique hadith. When we look at the difference between Muslim and Bukhari, there is a lot of hadith that they overlap on, and so we call these hadith al-lu'lu' wal-marjan. That they have a special name, which is or muttafaqun alayh, the hadith in which Bukhari and Muslim they agreed upon. So these hadith are considered, the cream of the crop, so to speak, in terms of authenticity of the hadith. And but Muslim, because he has more hadith than Bukhari, so Bukhari with without repetitions, I'm sorry, is about 3,000, and Muslim is 4,000 without repetition, and so he has approximately 1,000 more hadith. So Bukhari is going to be superior to Imam Muslim in regard to the criteria and therefore the authenticity of the book. Whereas many of the scholars have said that the organization of Sahih Muslim is superior to the organization of Sahih Bukhari. The organization is superior, and so it's an easier book to study, so to speak, than Sahih Bukhari, and Allah knows best. So the narrators of Sahih Muslim, so Imam Muslim narrated from 10 narrators, more than 50% of his book. So he had a very limited number of narrators compared to Bukhari. All of them were narrators according to Bukhari, with the exception of one, Ali ibn Hujr. And the top three narrators are Abu Bakr ibn Abi Shayba, who narrated. There are 1,540 narrations in Sahih Muslim. Zuhair ibn Harb, 1,281, and Muhammad ibn al-Muthanna, 772. So even you can do the math that it's approximately there. We're talking about 3,500 hadith. So out of 4,000, we can see here that these three narrators encompassed the vast majority of the book. And again, and that was his selection based on ilm al-rijal, on the knowledge of the narrators. And so some other issues that we might, so as I mentioned to you, there were some of the students of Imam Muslim, rahimahullah, that he took from. When we look at so let's see here. the students that studied from him, and they transmitted. So when we go back and we kind of almost like we look at like a family tree, okay? So he had three primary students, as I mentioned to you. Um, And the most important one, as I told you, was Ibrahim al-Sufyani. So Abu Ishaq Ibrahim al-Sufyan. He was the primary transmitter, so he was one of the closest students of Imam Muslim, who was known for his, mashallah, for his zuhd. He was a very simple human being in terms of the way he lived his life, and so we call it simplicity. Some people use the English word asceticism, and so we say that he was ascetic in his life. He had a simple life. He did not. He was not a man of luxury. A man who didn't care much for this world. He was an expert in hadith, and so his route of transmission is the dominant, route of transmission for Sahih Muslim. Um, and then we have two people who transmitted from Ibrahim ibn Sufyan, and that is Al-Jaludi, who is the most authoritative, and Muhammad ibn Yazid al-Adl. And we have also Abu Bakr al-Kisai, rahimahullah ta'ala. And so when we look at this specifically, so the other major transmitter of Sahih Muslim is Ahmad ibn Ali al-Qalanisi. Though his I guess his transmission is less than Ibrahim ibn Sufyan. So when we look at it, the primary transmitter, Ibrahim ibn Sufyan, he transmitted to Al-Kisai, Jaludi, and Muhammad ibn Yazid. Jaludi is the one who primarily transmitted, so we have his transmission is greatest. We have also other students was Al-Qalanisi, and we have Ibn Ash-Sharqi and Makkai Ibn Abdan. And so these are all people that transmitted from him. So there are at least 500 existing manuscripts of Sahih Muslim that have been transcribed over, 1,000 years, okay, by scribes from different regions. And so the existence of these manuscripts is second only to that of Sahih al-Bukhari. And so this is another thing especially for those people that challenge the kind of the existence of hadith. We see the widespread, manuscripts of Imam Muslim. And so, with regard to that, I think that is all that we have today. When we look at, if we were to kind of look at the life of Imam Muslim, he had a similar, similar kind of, you know, um, similar kind of difficulty that he experienced, like that of Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah. So we talked last week about Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, and how he was exposed to a great fitna, and that was that when people found that he became very, very popular, that they became jealous of him and they started to spread lies about him. Um, and so he, after becoming so famous in his lifetime, and uh, people in the thousands attending his halaqat, it reached the point where at the end he died alone. Rahimahullah ta'ala. He died, and the people found him several days after he had died, and so this was the impact, of the fitna that happened to him, rahimahullah ta'ala. But he stayed, true to him, to the deen, and to his work, and to the worship of Allah, and to Tawheed for the entirety of his life, all the way to the very end, despite all of these difficulties. And so, with regard to Imam Muslim, rahimahullah, a slightly different story. So, Muslim was born and raised, so remember that Bukhari, his father died early, whereas the father of Imam Muslim was a scholar of hadith, and Imam Muslim acquired, his initial knowledge about the Quran, Hadith, and other branches of Islamic learning from home. And he also memorized the entire Quran as well at a very early age. So they both kind of had a very similar upbringing, with the exception that Bukhari, his mother, was very involved in pushing him to go study with the different scholars, whereas Muslim, he had that education at home. And from there, we can take a moment to stop and to say, when we look at today, at the world today, and kind of like the fitna that's happening with the children. We see that this is exactly where the problem is that the vast majority of parents want to push off parenting onto another person. So a lot of Muslim parents, they think that if I just send my kid to an Islamic school, then they'll be okay. They don't really need parenting; they just need a good school. And this idea has led to the destruction of so many kids, because kids need their parents, and the most important person in the life of the child is going to be the parent for the vast majority of their life. And so when you think about it, that's what I always tell parents. I say, what message are you sending to your kids? If both the mom and the dad are working, and they work long hours, and when they get home, they're just exhausted, and all they want to do is have a meal and turn on the TV and watch some, stupid TV show or some, pointless movie, and then go to sleep. What message is that sending to the child? Aaron, what do you think? Or anybody from Sister Layla's group? So they would think that the child might say that, okay, I'm not important. Okay, that's one thing. But what is important then? If they're not important, what is important? What are mom and dad spending all their time on? They're spending time on the dunya, right? They're spending time on the material world. They're spending all of their effort to gain more stuff, to gain more money. Okay, so that is what they learn. And so they say, I guess the world, this dunya, must be really, really important. And I guess that the more stuff I have and the more money I have, the happier I'll be, because that's what my parents are doing. And so because my parents spend all their time doing that, and so that must be the most important thing, right? And so that's why kids from a very early age now, they're all they care about is the dunya. So you see kids who are very young, talking about, oh, I'm going to, this is what I'm going to do for work, and this is what I'm going to do for, to get money, and I'm going to, and so like you see like the explosion of, it's an interesting study that was done in the UK, where they asked a bunch of kids in school, they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And their answer was, I want to be famous. And that's not a job. Being famous is not a job. But they say, well, if I'm famous, I'll make a lot of money. And that's the whole concept right now. So all these young kids today, all they want to do is, be famous. And so they're doing all kinds of stupid things, online, doing stupid tricks and jumping off of things and killing themselves, right? And so whether they're killing themselves out of suicide because they're not famous, or they're killing themselves out of doing these silly tricks to try to get famous. The whole idea is, I want to get famous because when I'm famous, then people will love me and I'll have lots of money. And I think that's what the world is all about. And so we're not transmitting the right thing to our kids. And so the most important thing you can transmit, and this is what I always tell parents, your kids don't need a bigger house, your kids don't need a nicer car. Okay, Your kids need you. They need the parent. They need the existence of the parent at home, spending time with them, teaching them how to be a good human being. That's what they need more than anything else. So don't worry about the size of the house or the neighborhood in which you live in or the car in which you drive or the clothes that you wear. All of these things are secondary. How many a Muslim parent in this country, in the United States at least, has, worked themselves to the bone, because I want my kids to grow up in a good neighborhood. I want them to go to a good school, right? And then they end up becoming disbelievers. They grow up to become kuffar. They grow up to, become addicted to alcohol and drugs, or, basically following their lusts and their passions and so forth, and they have no connection to the deen. So what did you exactly accomplish? And so here we can see right away from this beautiful home in which Imam Muslim grew up. Look at what he did with the education that he received. Look at what the product that his parents produced, by spending that time with him. And so Imam Muslim wanted to be like his father, okay, who was a scholar of hadith. So he impacted upon him, the love of hadith, and so he had this love very early in life, okay, and so even before reaching the age of 15, he had already completed the study of the hadith under the leading scholars in his hometown. So we see again a similar idea as Bukhari, that he spent the time to learn locally. He didn't say, well, I'm going to go, inshallah, I'm going to go to Dallas, or I'm going to go to Chicago, and I'm going to study Islam, inshallah, like next year I'm planning to go, and, inshallah, when I get there, then no, like he studied from the people that were around him. Because all these other people, when they say, I'm going to go to here, there, I'm going to go to Mecca, I'm going to go to Medina, I'm going to Al-Azhar, and so years pass and they end up never going, or they might even go. They might go to these, beautiful places to learn, but then they come back after a year because, life intervenes and, something happened, and then that's it, it's over, because they didn't understand the importance of learning from the people who are around them. So the concept of learning is something that we do all the time, and we take every opportunity that is around us to learn before we feel that we need to travel or somewhere else to learn. So when Imam Muslim was only 14, he went to Mecca for Hajj. So again, we see very similar concepts here. So Bukhari was like 16, 17 when he went for Hajj. Muslim was 14. People today, they think that I should go for Hajj because, or I'm not going to go for Hajj until I'm 50. And so when they go, and then of course it never happens, they end up going when they're 60, and then they're already, too old, and their joints hurt, and can't walk very far, and they need a wheelchair and things of that nature. And so what happens is then they have to rely upon license the whole time, that, oh, the Prophet allowed me to do this, the Prophet allowed me to do this, I'm going to allow, someone's going to go throw the pebbles on my behalf, and all this type of, because they're too weak to do it on their own. But these people, we see that they went to Hajj when they were strong, when they were physically strong, to be able to handle it, to be able to complete the Hajj, and to make the Hajj as best as they possibly could, because they had the physical strength for it. So after completing Hajj, Imam Muslim decided to stay in Mecca for some time to study a hadith from the major scholars of that time. So again, very similar life history to Bukhari here. He also traveled to Medina, to Baghdad. So remember that Iraq at that time was the central place for learning. So Baghdad, Kufa, Basra, these cities of Baghdad, they were major centers of learning in this era of Islam. He also went to Khorasan, to Egypt, to ancient Syria, to Damascus, all these different cities, to learn more about the hadith from the senior scholars of that era. So he spent about 15 years traveling around the Muslim world acquiring knowledge. And so, by the time he was 30 years old, so he did this until he was 30 years old, subhanAllah, gathering all this knowledge. So he had a large number of shuyukh that he studied from, and around 220 of them were narrators of hadith themselves. Okay, so he learned hadith at the feet of the scholars who themselves were narrators of hadith. Okay, so among them, as we already said, Imam Ahmad, Yahya ibn Yahya, Ishaq ibn Rahawayh, Qutayba ibn Sa'id. All these were, distinguished scholars in that generation, and including Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah. So Muslim was also, a student of Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Zuhayli, who was one of the most prominent scholars of Bukhara until Bukhari returned and settled. So remember that after Bukhari kind of left Iraq, after the fitna that happened to him, he went and he spent some time in Bukhara, and that the governor of Bukhara wanted him to come and teach his kids, and he said, knowledge should be, you should go to knowledge which doesn't come to you. And because of the trouble he had with the governor there, he ended up going and settling in that small village where he ended up passing away. So, but prior to Bukhari returning to Bukhara, the great scholar of hadith there was Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Zuhayli. So once Bukhari came and he started to teach his own classes in Bukhara, the number of students with Zuhayli started to decrease, and his most important student, Imam Muslim, also became a regular student in Bukhari's halaqah. So this caused some kind of jealousy in the heart of Zuhayli, and he wanted some competition, and so Zuhayli was one of the people who unfortunately spread that lie about Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, and as a result, Muslim, though he studied from him, he did not mention a single hadith from Zuhayli in his book because of that fact, because of the fact that his behavior was not conducive, it was not part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this type of jealousy and lying against others and slandering other people. So, other than the books of hadith or the book of his hadith, the Sahih hadith, Muslim, he also authored books on Asma al-Rijal, the biography of the hadith narrators. He also wrote on Usul al-Hadith. In fact, in the very beginning of Sahih Muslim, there is a very beautiful explanation of the science of hadith. So he has a kind of like, he gives like a short primer on the science of hadith in the introduction to Sahih Muslim itself. He also wrote a book on biography of the children of the companions, radiallahu ta'ala anhum. So he wrote about 28 books, but not all of them are existing today. And so, of course, Sahih Muslim is the one that is the most prominent. So it's reported that Muslim collected around 300,000 ahadith while traveling in the Muslim world. So somewhat similar to Bukhari, but Bukhari was double that, 600,000. But Muslim gathered around 300,000 hadith in those 15 years that he traveled. And he only accepted about 7,500 hadith in thereabouts with repetitions. And so his book is essentially 4,000 hadith. So it is reported regarding his death that while teaching hadith, someone from his halaqah mentioned an authentic hadith which Muslim was not aware of. So Muslim became a little bit kind of bothered by this, that he was not aware of this hadith. And when he returned to his home, he started to review his collections of hadith in order to see why he did not have that hadith, or where did he have it and did he forget it, or what exactly happened. And so he told his family that no one should disturb him while he was doing this kind of review. And so someone had given him a basket of dates that he kept in his office or his study. So as he was looking in his collections to find a hadith, he continued to eat the dates one after the other. And he was looking for the hadith the whole night, and he finished the entire basket of dates. And so he was found in the morning that he had passed away, with his face kind of laying in the books of his manuscripts of hadith, subhanallah ta'ala. And so, it's just, he died, subhanallah. He lived his life, in the gathering of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and he died in the same manner, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was only 55 years old when he died. And so, was it related to maybe to the elevated blood sugar? Allah knows best. But this kind of gives a little bit of the, kind of some of the story of his life and some of the, incidents from his life, like we talked about last week. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khair. Is there any questions on any of that? Zahira, we finished the slides early, and so we were just talking, just kind of looking at some lessons from his life, but we finished the slides in the first 30 minutes. So inshallah, I'll share with you the slides.
Okay, thank you, Jazakallah, Doctor. I'm so sorry for being late.
It's okay, no problem. And I did receive your exam. I haven't, forgive me, I was a little bit busy during the week and I didn't finish grading it. So inshallah, this weekend I'll make sure to finish grading it, inshallah. Any questions on the life and work of Imam Muslim? All right, if there's no questions on that, inshallah, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for usul al-fiqh, inshallah. Inshallah, I will. My goal is to support you, not to reduce you in any way, Zahir. So we will get back to usul al-fiqh, inshallah. So last week we did not do that. So this week, inshallah, we're going to continue kind of where we left off previously with Qiyaas. So Qiyaas, once again, is analogy. Okay, so if we want to look at a single word definition or translation, it would be the analogy. So when we look at it in the Arabic language, the word Qiyas means measuring or ascertaining the length, weight, or quality of something. So when we say qis al-pantalon, for example, like, measure the pants or something like that, measure the fabric. And so this is how it is used in the Arabic language. When we look at it in the language of usul, on the other hand, qiyas is the extension of a sharia ruling from an original case, an asl, to a new case, a fara, because the new case has the same effective cause, illa, as the original case. So let's look at that a little bit more specifically. When we're dealing with new matters, okay, so let's take the example of, beer. Okay, so beer. So when we look at the prohibition in the Quran, okay, it is khamr. So khamr specifically is referring to what in the Quran? Anybody can tell me?
Wine?
Wine, exactly. So we're talking specifically about wine. So what was prohibited in the time of the Prophet ﷺ was, the fermented beverage, and that typically was wine. That was what was available at that time. So the question then becomes, okay, is it only wine? So as long as if I'm fermenting something from, a different substance, does that make it prohibited? So this is the question that the ulama that they had. Okay, and so when we start dealing with new substances, okay, we'll not use beer, we use something that's even more modern, say like, some of these other spirits that were more modern. Okay, and so does the prohibition apply? Does the same prohibition apply to these types of drinks? Or even more modern issue is if we look at something like um, a processed type of drug like LSD. So LSD did not exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So LSD was created in the synthesized as a synthetic drug that was created in like the 1960s or 1950s or something like that. So it didn't exist. And so now all of a sudden we start to come and say, okay, is LSD halal or is it haram? So this is a new case. All right. So this is we're trying to understand something here. So we have the original case, the asl, okay, which is that alcohol is prohibited. Okay. Specifically, wine is prohibited. Okay. Now, when we look at farah, we're looking at, okay, what about other types of intoxicants? Okay. What about new drugs like LSD? Okay. So these are the new cases, we call them the farah. Okay. And so asl and farah, they also, if you want to understand, like in the Arabic language, asl is like the root and the farah is like the branches. Okay. So what we're trying to then look for is the same effective cause, the illah. Okay. Is the same effective cause found in the original as well as the farah? Okay. So what would be the effective cause? Why is khamr prohibited? Is khamr prohibited because of fermentation of the grape or the date? It's because it intoxicates. It removes the intellect. Okay, and that's kind of where we get the word khamr. Okay, it has this Arabic connotation of veiling the intellect. All right. Um, So the principle then is the veiling of the intellect or the loss of the intellect, anything which causes loss of the intellect, thereby it should carry the same ruling. Everybody with me? A lot of mental processes when it comes to usul al-fiqh. So, Sister Layla, anybody on your side with questions? So we have to understand these three things moving forward. We have to understand the asl, the fara, and the illah moving forward. We have to know what we're talking about. And so the idea is that we're looking at the illah here is very, very important when it comes to the concept of analogy or qiyas. We have to look for this effective cause, okay, to be able to move forward. So therefore, the original case is regulated by a text of the Quran or Sunnah, and Qiyas seeks to extend the original ruling to the new case. So, again, going back to our example, we have wine is very clearly prohibited in the Quran or Sunnah, and now we're using Qiyas, we're using analogy to extend that prohibition to newer entities that were maybe not in use or not known in the time of the revelation of the Quran and Sunnah to extend the same ruling. So the emphasis of qiyas is identification of a common cause between the original and the new case, and that is sabab or illah. And so the illah we already know, sabab is also known as cause, okay, the reason for. So jurists, the Islamic jurists, do not consider law derived through qiyas as a new law. Okay, because essentially what we're doing is we're extending the existing law of the Quran or Sunnah to newer entities. We're extending the existing law found in the Quran or Sunnah to newer entities, which share the same prohibitive reasoning, sabab or illah, okay, as to the original. So, but for all practical matters, Qiyas leads to a new ruling on a different matter, okay? But again, we will not consider this a new ruling because of the fact that it's essentially an extension of the existing ruling. So now let's understand these words, sabab and illa. Okay. So sabab, Arabic word, which means reason for, okay, cause of, illa and illa, okay, which we've already been talking about, similar. Okay. So sabab is used as a synonym for illa, and the two are often used interchangeably. So when we look specifically at usul al-fiqh, the scholars of usul tend to use sabab in reference to devotional matters, okay, like the acts of worship, ibadat, but use illa in all other contexts, okay? So it could also be looked at the sabab is the cause or occasion for something, and illa is thought to as the basis or rationale for a stance or a ruling. So, as an example of that, the arrival of Ramadan is the cause of fasting, but intoxication is the rationale or the basis for the prohibition of drinking wine. So again, so they are generally used interchangeably, but specifically in the science of usul al-fiqh, there is a bit of a difference. Okay, there is a little bit of a difference in that. To give you a little bit more perspective or a little bit more detail on how some of the scholars of usul al-fiqh they might take this to a further point. Okay, they will look at the sabab is the its presence necessitates the existence of a ruling, a hukm. But if it's absent, it equals the absence of that ruling or hukm. So it is not the motive or the reason or the rationale or the basis behind the legislation of the ruling, okay? But it is like a condition. So that's how some of the scholars they look at it. So in that case, sabab is related to the existence of the hukm in reality. So as we already mentioned, the citing of the month of Ramadan is the sabab or the reason for the obligation of fasting upon those who cite it. So Allah's statement, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ month should fast. So what is the condition? The condition is that you see that you are resident during the time of Ramadan. Okay. So so do I have to fast? Yes, I have to fast, but only in that case. Okay. So if I'm a traveler and the month of Ramadan comes, then I don't have the obligation of fasting. If I'm sick and the month of Ramadan comes, I don't have the obligation of fasting. If I am healthy and a resident, meaning I'm not a traveler, but it's the month of Sha'ban, do I have to fast? No, because the obligation is in Ramadan. So this is the whole idea, okay? That the existence of the cause equals the ruling, okay? Or brings about the ruling of fasting. What is the illah of fasting Ramadan though? See if you understand that. So sabab we talked about is the conditions. Okay. But what about the rationale, the basis? What's the basis for fasting Ramadan? Which is found in the same page in the Quran. Very good, Zahira. Again, لعلكم تتقون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. All you who believe, fasting has been prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you might gain taqwa, so that you might establish taqwa in your lives. So the reason, okay, for it, the basis, the rationale for fasting is to end up with taqwa. to learn to protect ourselves from the punishment of Allah by obeying Him. But the conditions for fasting Ramadan are different, and so this is the kind of the fine line that some of the scholars, not all of them, but some of the scholars of Usul al-Fiqh will look at. So to put it a different way, a sabab indicates the presence of the obligation, not the motive nor the reason for the obligation. The presence of the obligation is different from the reason for the obligation. So the illah, which is the matter for whose sake the hukm has come into being, okay, it is the motive behind the legislation of the ruling. Thus, it is related to the legislation of the ruling and not related to its presence. So, al-illah is the reason for the obligatory nature of the ruling, not the reason for its existence. Okay, so that's just a different way to go about it to make it a little bit easier. So, identifying the illah then is something very, very important. So the scholars of usul al-fiqh, or the mujtahid scholars, okay, they have to be very careful in identifying the illah, because if you don't find the illah, you cannot extend the existing ruling to a new case. All right, so remember, what we're trying to do here is we're dealing with something which is relatively new, something which is not precisely or specifically dealt with in the Quran or Sunnah. And now we're trying to determine, what is the ruling on this issue? Is there an ability for us to identify a common rationale or basis or reasoning between the new case and anything old? Okay, so the illah could be identified explicitly in the text. So, for example, Allah gives us the illah for fasting, as we just mentioned, very explicitly, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may gain taqwa. But sometimes the illah is not very specific. Okay, it can only be alluded to, or it could be extracted through the process of extracting the illah. And so there is a procedure for that, which is generally three steps: تنقيح المنات, تخريج المنات, and تحقيق المنات. Okay, and so here the word manat is a synonym for illah. I know that can be confusing, and I'm sorry. But when we look at here, the manat is essentially the illah. Okay. So let's look at these steps. Okay. So tanqih al-manat. Okay. A ruling, and I'm sorry, a illah, or a reason or rationale or basis for a ruling may appear to be a few instead of one. Okay. So for example, what is the illah behind prohibiting riba? So when we look at usury or interest, what is the reason why this was prohibited? Is this something which is explicitly mentioned in the Quran or in the Sunnah? So the prohibition of riba is found very clearly in more than one place in the Quran. But what about the illah for it? That's what I'm asking. Is the reason, the rationale for it found in the Quran? Is it specific, like what we talked about with fasting? Is it explicitly mentioned that riba has been prohibited to you because? Does an ayah like that exist? Or hadith like that exist? And the answer generally is no. So it doesn't have this explicit, the illah is not explicit. Okay? The illah is not explicit for why it is prohibited. Okay? And part of that reason is that there are many reasons why it is. So it is found, it is when you look into the issue of riba, of usury and interest, you find that there are many different reasons for it. Okay, so people who talk today, there's of course the most common question in the West is, can I participate in an interest-based, loan? So students who want to take loans to go to school, or people who want to take out a loan in order to buy a house, for example. These types of things is when we look at that, okay, there's so many different the reasons why it is prohibited. There's not just one. Okay. So what the mujtahid scholar has to do is he has to proceed, or he or she has to proceed to eliminate the improper illah and find out the proper illah, or what we call munasib. Okay, so munasib is a common Arabic word which basically means, you know, reasonable, or convenient, or adequate, something along those lines. And so I might ask you, um, would it be okay for us to meet tomorrow at noon? Is that munasib for you? Okay. هل هذا الوقت مناسب? And so is this time munasib? Is it good for you? Is it proper for you, or adequate, or convenient, that type of thing? Okay. So what's happening here is that, remember that what are we trying to do? We're trying to do qiyas. Okay, we're trying to extend a ruling from one matter, something which is essentially old, okay, something which is an asl, okay, a foundational principle, something which is prohibited in the Quran and Sunnah explicitly, and we're trying to see, is that rationale, can I extend that to other things? All right. So when you have a matter like riba, which has multiple ilal, okay, I have to see, okay, which illah am I trying to expand here? Which illah am I trying to stretch to see if it's going to fit the new subject? And so that's the tanqih. Okay, does that make sense? Isolating the specific rationale that I want to use, okay, to determine whether I can use it for analogy. So that's what the first step, okay? Sometimes tanqih al-manat so here's the question to help you see if you understand it well. Is tanqih al-manat always necessary? Or will there be cases in which I don't need to do tanqih? I don't need to isolate. So are there cases, is tanqih al-manat, is it always necessary, or is this sometimes unnecessary, or this step can be skipped in certain cases? Okay, very good, Zahira. Why can it be skipped in some cases?
Maybe there are other cases where the illa is a bit more clear or
Perfect.
more.
Exactly. If the illah is clear, okay, if the illah is explicit, then I don't. What's the point of me isolating? It is already isolated for me. Or in the case in which there is one illah. So when there's one illah and it's explicit, then it's done. That part is done for me. Okay, the tanqih is already done. So what I'm doing with tanqih is only in the case when it is not clear, or there are multiple, right? And I don't know which one exactly am I going to be using. Then I have to sit down and go through this process. So very good. It can sometimes be skipped. All right. So takhrij al-manat. Okay. So when the illah is not clearly stated in the nas. Okay. What's nas? Who remembers this important term? Yeah, the text. So text of Quran or Sunnah. So when the illah is not clearly stated in the Quran or Sunnah, the mujtahid has to find out the illah, okay, through ijtihad. Okay, so he has to struggle mentally to try to figure out what is the rationale. And so this is done by a two-stage process. And so that is takhrij, extracting the illah, okay, is the first step. And so you're doing your best to try to find the takhrij. So takhrij and tanqih, sometimes they can be merged, okay? Sometimes there are exactly the same thing. And sometimes they're not. And so it depends on, again, so maybe takhrij and manat is when there's only one illah that we're trying to extract. And tanqih would be when there is more than one. Okay. And then the last step, okay, would be tahqiq al-manat. So tahqiq al-manat consists of investigation of the presence of the illah in the new case where the ruling is to be extended. So can the analogy be extended to pickpocketing from stealing, or whether herbal drinks have the same illah as wine? Okay. Or as we were talking about earlier, beer or other types of drinks or LSD. Okay, can that be extended? So that is then the process which the mujtahid goes through in order to say, okay, the reason. So in my scholarly opinion, okay, LSD is prohibited Islamically because it has the same illah as alcohol, as wine, drinking wine. Drinking wine brings about intoxication, which separates the human being from their intellect. The person is no longer capable of functioning intellectually, okay, in the same manner as without the alcohol. So they have there's something is covering or something is veiling their intellect, and as a result, they do they do things that of which they're not aware, and this is not consistent with Islam. In the same way, the person who's using LSD, their mind is even more veiled. Okay, we might say that it's even more veiled than the use of alcohol, or the use of wine, and as a result, then if this prohibition extends to wine, it should extend even more so to a substance like LSD. Does that make sense? How that process would go? Okay. And so forth. And so, and with this case now, is there going to be now, because we're doing Qiyaas, can there be disagreement on this? Yes, there can. So someone might say, I disagree with your ijtihad. I disagree with your reasoning, okay? Because the reason that alcohol was prohibited is X, Y, is something, maybe the person looks at it from a different illah, okay? And so he says, and this is exactly what happened. And so we look at, when it comes to the prohibition, we look at Imam Abu Hanifa, for example. Abu Hanifa, he says that he characterizes things that are produced by fermentation of the grape and fermentation of the date, that they have a special categorization compared to any other type of fermented beverage. Okay. And as a result of that, he has some unique rulings that not all of the other scholars share. And so the concept here being is that there can be disagreements, okay? Because what's happening here is that this is you using your logic, okay, to try to see, is this new matter I'm trying to, or this new problem I'm trying to solve, does it have a basis in the Quran and Sunnah? And if so, what is that basis? Okay, so your intellect may be different than mine, okay, or your intellect may be better than mine, and as a result, you come to a different conclusion than I do, and this is why, Qiyaas, there can be disagreement on that issue. For the most part, though, alhamdulillah, and this is a great mercy from Allah and a great sign of the beauty of Islam, is that when it comes to qiyas, and we're talking about qiyas, the vast majority of the scholars, that they are in a very, very strong agreement with one another on the issues of qiyas themselves. And so you don't find a wide range of difference or a great deal of disagreement on these issues, alhamdulillah. And so that is all that I prepared for today for qiyas, and understanding the difference between sabab and illah, particularly just understanding the illah, is what what our objective was today. So any questions on that, or questions on anything else that we covered today?
Doctor, I don't have questions, but I just want to clarify. So the tanqiq al-manat would be to extract an illah that we kind of already know, right? And the takhrij
Yes.
is to extract an illah which is not very clear. So we are
Both
trying
of them
to...
are not clear. Both of them are not clear. So tanqih is generally, tanqih is trying to separate it out. It's trying to say, okay, it looks like there's more than one. Okay, which one is it? Okay, which one am I really trying to deal with? So you're isolating it. So the tanqih, it means to isolate. So you have multiple, and you're isolating one that you are trying to to deal with. And so that can be something which is more explicit or less explicit. Okay, but there's usually several. Whereas takhrij is where it's definitely not explicit. It's something which is not explicit in the Quran or Sunnah, and what you're trying to do is extract it.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
جزانا وإياكم إن شاء الله. That's why we said that tanqih is not always going to be there, because tanqih may not be necessary because of the fact that there's an issue which only has one illah, or that illah is explicit enough that there's no need to isolate it whatsoever. And in that case, but when we talk about takhrij, we're always talking about things that are not explicit, and in that case, and so tahqiq will be done one way or the other, whether it is explicit or not explicit. All right. If there is no other questions, then inshallah we'll end for today. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. Barakallah fikum for coming, and inshallah we'll have class next week. And I wanted to ask a question: did we in I can't remember in the first semester, did we start the tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah or not? I know that we did tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha. We didn't do Al-Baqarah at all, right? Okay, so inshallah then, starting next week, inshallah, we will do some tafsir of Surah Al-Baqarah as part of the Quran session. And so inshallah we'll start out the next week, inshallah, with the 3 sessions as before. And so inshallah we'll do Quran, Hadith, and Usul bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And barakallah fikum. If there's any questions after we close off, just you can always reach out to me by email. Sister Laila, anything from the brothers and sisters on your side? Inshallah next week, yes.
Doctor, do you have a minute just to humor me? There is a scholar, supposedly, that has come out and just released a statement that says that if you add enough water to khamar, to wine, it does not make it, since it's no longer intoxicant, it makes it halal.
Right. And so This contradicts, so there so in principle the statement which he's making is correct in principle, okay, but how much is the question. So so right now, as an example, if a person put a drop of alcohol in a huge tank of water. So like you see like these big tanks, like water tanks that have like 1,000 liters or 10,000 liters or something like that. Okay, one drop of alcohol into that. Will it cause the water to become haram? And the answer is no, because it's diluted to such an extent that it's irrelevant. Okay, so the parts per million is so insignificant that it has no impact whatsoever. Now, but you see how we're doing it. We're adding a small degree of alcohol to a huge body of water. Now, can a person add water to an alcoholic drink to make it halal? That's the opposite.
Should be no, right?
No. Why?
Because would it not just be his intention to drink the alcoholic drink?
Well, that his intention aside, but why would that be haram? Because what are we dealing with? So, what is the initial the original basis is what? The original basis is alcohol, right? Now I'm trying to add enough water, okay, or I'm adding water to something which is in its essence is what?
Intoxicant,
It's haram.
intoxicating.
It's haram. So without no need to get into that, we're talking about something which is known to be haram. So I'm adding something to something which is haram. Okay, but the essence of it is haram to begin with, and this is the concept when we look at like so we talk about some of the vinegars and sauces and things like that that come from alcohol. So the base is alcohol. Okay, so the principle is that I'm not going to be able to take something which is haram, okay, and turn it into something halal. I cannot chemically convert that, and so that's the basis of this in the fiqh, is that when something is haram, its basis is haram, that's it, we're done. But now with the other example, okay, which is the basis is water is halal, and a drop of alcohol falls into it, or a drop of impurity. Usually the scholars are talking about this from the standpoint of impurity, not from the standpoint of intoxication. Okay, so they're saying, so the same thing could be said, okay, what if a drop of urine falls into a big tank of water? Does that make the water impure? And the answer is no, because it's a very small type of thing, and so the large amount of water it invalidates the impurity of that. And alcohol is impure or not?
It's impure, it's haram.
It is haram, but the impurity is one of those issues in which the scholars are different, have difference of opinion. And so when it comes to khamr itself, wine, then there is no difference of opinion on this matter. That they say it is impure. All of it is impure. Anything which is made from the grape or the date, any of these types of fermented beverages, that they are also impure themselves, and so they're najis. And so that's usually where the question comes from. So the scholars, when they were debating these issues, they're looking at it from the standpoint of impurity. But But I hope you understand the kind of the logic that I'm trying to share with you, which is that what are we dealing with at its onset? So what is the initial subject? Is it halal or haram? That will determine whether I can go forward.
Okay, yes, I do. I get it now. I mean, like, it kind of makes sense. Yes.
Yes. And so that's the idea, is that I cannot start with something haram and just say, well, I'm going to, chemically alter it or whatever, play with it. And this is the whole issue when it comes down to, like, a lot of times we talk about this is okay with pork. So this is another issue in fiqh, kind of disagreements. Can a pork product chemically be converted into something which is halal? So again, like the majority of the scholars, they say no, the pork in of itself. So you're starting with something haram. When you start with something haram, it is, it maintains or it carries that haram nature, even with changing chemicals changes. And so how can you be certain that you have changed it effectively to remove that haram from it? And so that's why the scholars, they say, avoid it. You stay away from that type of thing because its essence is haram, right? But we look at vinegar. Okay, so what is vinegar? Or how do I create vinegar?
Doctor, I only eat it. I don't even know how it's made.
It's made because you start with let's say a grape. Okay, so you ferment a grape. The grape will go through a stage of being alcohol. Okay, so we start right now with grape juice. Okay, and I leave it to ferment. I leave it to ferment naturally. So it will go first from grape juice to alcohol to becoming wine, and then it will continue its fermentation process to become vinegar. Okay, that's the process. Vinegar is halal. Okay, but if I take an alcoholic beverage right now and I say I'm going to leave this alcoholic beverage to ferment until it becomes vinegar, is it halal or haram?
That would be haram because they're starting off with the alcohol.
Exactly.
Whereas the vinegar, it started off with the grape.
Exactly. Very good, Masha. Excellent.
Okay.
And so that's how. So again, now there is difference of opinion on this matter to some extent, but the vast majority of the ulama, they're kind of on that principle. Okay, that how did you start? Okay, if you started with something halal, even if that halal thing went through a phase of being haram, but then it phased out as vinegar does, then it becomes permissible. But when you start with something which is haram in of itself, then it carries that impurity with it all the way through. And so that's why they say like the vinegars that are made from wine, okay, vinegar that's made from wine, then this is a haram substance. Okay, so wine vinegars, okay, which start with alcohol and then become vinegar, then these are considered to be haram again by a majority of scholars. There are certainly always going to be some different opinions. And so, Sister Layla, your question. So, can alcohol be used to clean air of the skin? So, there is no difference of opinion on this matter that this is acceptable. And that's because what we're looking at now is we're looking at isopropyl alcohol. Okay, so this is chemically alcohol, but we're not talking about fermented. So these are generally synthetic alcohols, not. So if you were to ask me, could I use wine to clean my skin? Nobody would do that, of course, because wine is, it ruins everything. So you wouldn't pour wine on a table to clean it. It will stain the table and ruin the table. But isopropyl alcohol, which is synthetic, okay, it does carry the problem the what's it called um, property of potentially intoxicating, but it's actually toxic. Okay, so isopropyl alcohol, these types of things, whereas it is, I guess you could say, it is theoretically possible to become intoxicated from them. The likelihood of a person becoming, poisoning themselves is way higher. Okay, and so the reason that the ulama said that isopropyl alcohol and these types of alcohols, these synthetic types of alcohols generally are permissible and they're not impure, is because they don't start with the fermentation of the substances. So we look at fermentation, which is used to create the vast majority of wines, and so they're using the fermentation of the grape or the date to create wines. Then these substances in of themselves, they are impure and they cannot be used to but isopropyl alcohol or these types of synthetic alcohols like hand sanitizer and things like that everybody's using these days after COVID, these are synthetics, and they're not fermented types of substances, and so there is no difference of opinion in that they are permissible. So every scholar says that they're permissible. There's no difference of opinion on that matter, and Allah knows best.
Jazakallah, doctor, for humoring me that because a
Yeah.
scholar just came out and said that, and I did not know what to think of it.
Yeah, so he is mistaken because he is reversing, and so as I said, it is a conversation. You will find it in the books of fiqh, that this conversation about is water made impure by the addition of an impurity to it. And what we're looking at here is because we start looking at the medicines and things of that nature, so some types of medication are carried, the carrier oil or the carrier base is alcohol and things of that nature. And so this conversation starts to come into place in that regards. Is the alcohol is being added to the medicine, okay? And so is the addition of this impurity, does it cause the medicine to become impure or cause the water to become impure or something like that? So sometimes when they're adding a chemical, to the water, does that cause it to become impure? So Allah bless you as well. Allah, I mean. And so this is usually the discussion that's had is we're talking about something which is in its essence permissible, that's now we're adding an impurity to it. At what point in time does it become impure? That's the question that the ulama were dealing with. They're not dealing with the other way around. Okay, they're not dealing with something which is impure, adding a pure substance to the impure to make it pure. Nobody's talking about that. And so there's and again, as you said, Zahir, I mean, you nailed it right away, which is there's some lack of sincerity here is apparent in that this appears to be somebody who's trying to find a way to make the haram halal in that regards, and that's another issue altogether. But overall, but you understand those principles now, inshallah. That will help you to navigate that in the future, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. All right, guys. Well, it was a pleasure as always. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Inshallah, we'll end here, and inshallah, I'll catch you guys next week. Next week, just as a kind of a warning, I will be at work, and so for some reason I happen to be dealing with an emergency at that time. We might end up canceling next week. I'm going to go ahead and proceed with the class, inshallah, with the assumption that, inshallah, hopefully I will be available at that time. But for some reason, if I'm busy, then we'll have to either shorten or delay the class to the week after. So hopefully that we'll be able to get through it. But if not, I just wanted to share that with you so you're not confused. Jazakumullah khair, and inshallah look forward to seeing you next week.